Hey everyone, welcome. It's Baron. And as you saw, this is a bit of an unusual one. So, what's going on? What are we looking at? This is a build that I have been tooling around with some version of this. I've been theory crafting this for literal weeks. I've had some version of this in and out of Path of Building for weeks. And just for a little context, it honestly started with the idea of using an antiquarian node that I'm actually no longer using. Um, so the whole thing started, I wanted a tanky build, and I was like, all right, let's see if we can make a build that is going to use Lion Eye's shield. 50% chance to block from equipped shield instead of the shield's value. I just wanted to start with that. And this build has gone through so many different iterations and changes and everything that in the end, I'm doing nothing that even remotely involves blocking. In fact, what I am doing is pretty much a newer, unique take on Wardloop, or cast when damage taken Wardloop, its full name. So it's a very complex build, Wardloop is, and a full explanation would take me like an hour to do, but there are some resources I can link that can catch you up to speed on it. But here's what you need to know, because many of the principles are going to apply to what I'm doing in this build here. Here's what you need to know. Wardloop is a build that relies on the unique properties of the ward defensive mechanic to enable a self-sustaining loop in which you constantly cast spells that will deal some self-damage to you, and then they in turn cause that self-damage again in the future. And so you can constantly activate the gem, cast when damage taken, based on this. And so, as you saw, a constant loop. And so, let's see how best to do this. Let's say a little bit about Ward, and then I can dive into the build proper. How's that? So, Ward. Visible as this kind of yellow, orange, gold, whatever it is, shield on top of your life. Not dissimilar from how Energy Shield works. Ward is also a global defense, like Energy Shield, Evasion, Armor. But unlike those, I don't think Ward was ever intended on its introduction in patch 3.15 Expedition. I don't think it was ever intended to be a primary defensive layer like the others, where you could, throw in a couple secondary defensive layers like Suppression and Overcapped Res and have yourself a build. It just doesn't seem designed to do that, because what Ward does is, however much you've got, it will absorb damage up to that amount. If you've got 1,000 Ward, it will absorb damage from one hit up to 1,000 damage. None of that goes to your life. If you got hit for 1,500 damage, only 500 would go to your life. But then the crucial feature of Ward is that it breaks. One hit. It breaks after one hit and takes some time to come back, like Energy Shield does. So that's not a great basis for a defensive layer, when we all know in Path of Exile you're getting hit by monsters in juice content many times per second. So when Ward was first launched, it took 4 seconds for Ward to reappear after it took a single hit. And it didn't matter the size of the hit. Even if you only took a 50 damage hit on 1,000 Ward, it would break just the same as if you had taken 1,000 or 8,000. And 7,000 of it went to your life. It breaks all the same, and it took 4 seconds to come back. Well, they eventually buffed that to be 2 seconds, and there are some gear modifiers that let you lower it even further. But even then, you're getting, even if you could get it down to regenerate in under 1 second, you're getting hit more than once a second in a lot of content. So not a great permanent full-time defensive layer. Not unless you make use of a very interesting item that also launched in patch 3.15 and is really the centerpiece of Ward loop builds, Olroth's Resolve. Can you make a loop build without this? Yes, but it probably isn't going to be a ward loop. It'll be some other kind of build, maybe where you are recouping the damage that you're dealing to yourself or something like that. But if you are doing a ward build, you're relying on the ward to deal damage to yourself without your health pool actually going down. And that is what Olroth's Resolve does. It has a devastating drawback of 85% less ward during effect. So that guy we talked about with 1,000 ward, he goes down to only having 250 ward during effect. But ward does not break during effect. I actually don't need that too, Divine. So I'll just go on D&D for now. If he wants it later, I can get it to him. Ward does not break during effect. This means you can deal yourself 100 hits a second, and as long as none of them individually are greater than the amount of ward you have, then your ward doesn't break. It's like none of them ever happened. Enemies can hit you, you can hit yourself, doesn't matter. So this is the key, right? Is you need to have Olroth's Resolve up constantly. It was one of the main puzzles that a Wardloop build needed to solve. Here's the thing. I needed to solve that for this build too, because I'm also doing like I said, a Wardloop variant. But I had an added challenge. I had a couple added challenges, actually. Number one is that under normal circumstances, you'd probably be running Wardloop as a Scion Ascendant who has access to the Pathfinder node, the Pathfinder Ascendant node, which gives flask charges per second. So we're at a handicap there in terms of keeping Olroth's up. The other handicap from a mathematical standpoint was I was holding myself to a much higher standard. I didn't simply want Olroth's Resolve to have 100% uptime. If you were paying attention during that video, you may have seen at very reliable intervals my life would spike downward and back up. Why? That is because, believe it or not, I deliberately built, and it took me some effort to do it too, to break the cardinal rule of Wardloop builds and allow Olroth's Resolve to drop off before coming back up. Why would I do that? The whole point of this is that your life never takes damage, right? Why would you want ward to break? And the answer is in Runic Tablet, an Antiquarian node. I was not sure I was going to be able to fit this into the build to make it work when I started considering a Wardloop style build. I had resigned myself to the possibility that maybe, even though this looks tempting, I may not be able to make it work. In the end, I did manage to make it work. There is certainly a version of this build that can be done a little bit more safely and a lot more easily that does not take advantage of this, but it just feels so much better to have adrenaline. You run around faster, you have increased damage. It's so much better. So what I did, and I'm proud of this one, I'll be the first to admit I'm bragging on this one. I did a lot of math and worked out how I could cause my Olroth's Resolve to be up for exactly 10 seconds, the duration of adrenaline, go down for 0.2 seconds. And during that 0.2 seconds, while Olroth's Resolve is down and my ward is vulnerable to breaking, I would deal myself one hit. That's right, the self-damage that we deal in Wardloop, I had to calculate its cooldown, its frequency in such a way that it would come through exactly once, break the ward, and no more, or else it would just purely hit my life total and I would probably die. That was not easy. Now, I will also admit up front, I thought this would work differently than it did. If this had worked the way I thought it did, this would be even more of a potent combination. As it is, it's cute. And it works, but I put myself in more danger than I thought I was going to be. So what do I mean by that? Well, I was under the impression that because the damage I deal to myself is processed all on one server tick. Remember, Path of Exile breaks down its information packet transfer into 30 ticks per second of 33 milliseconds each. And because I was causing all my self-damage from all sources to happen on the same server tick, I thought that it would be processed as one hit for ward purposes. It is not. That was a mistake on my part, and as I say it out loud, I'm realizing how silly it sounds, that of course the game wouldn't process it that way, but it was just this unconscious assumption that I had. What I had basically planned on it being was that the ward would break, but my life would not be touched. And as it turns out, I don't think there's a way to do that. Or rather, there is, but I'm happy to talk about it in the comments, put it that way. It was not feasible with this build to do that, because what basically happens is one of the hits comes in, breaks the ward, and then all the other hits happen in the same server tick, but the ward already counts as broken, so they impact my life. Now, fortunately, I built this to be quite tanky, and there is so much life in the build that I can afford to have a single server tick, a single damage instance actually impact my life and I don't die. As you see, I recoup it quite quickly when that happens. But it would have been better if I was only taking just the one big hit that just causes ward to break and nothing else. I am all ears if folks think that they've got ideas for how they could make that happen. I had one cute idea that I thought was going to be able to work out, and it didn't. We don't need to spend too much time on that. But yes, that is why I am allowing Olroth's Resolve to go down in this build. The better question, and the one that I'm still pretty proud of, is sure, you can cause it to go down, but then how do you cause it to come back up again in a timely fashion, like in a predictable, timely fashion, without sitting there watching the bar and the moment it's been down for a half second, click real quick and bring it back. The whole point of a Wardloop build is I don't want to have to do that. I don't want to have to think about the timing of my clicks. I just want to run around and let the spells cast themselves. So how do I do it? I thought this was pretty ingenious. Most Wardloop builds will rely on the reused at the end of flasks effect, enchantment. This intuitively makes sense. You get the most possible duration out of every single charge that you are accumulating to your flask. This is the way to make those flask charges stretch as long as possible. I instead went with I'm not going to call it underused, because I think it's used the appropriate amount, which is nearly 0, except in this one niche circumstance. There is an enchantment I'm using, use when an adjacent flask is used. I don't think I've seen anybody use this seriously, any serious Path of Exile player use this, but I'm taking advantage of it here because I have, with quality and flask effect duration, I have precisely titrated my 2 flasks. Dying Sun, which is a great contribution to the build. It helps me run Righteous Fire because it's max fire resistance. It gives me more projectiles for my skills. It's amazing. This flask lasts 10.2 seconds. 10.2. Olroth's lasts 10. They are exactly 0.2 seconds apart. Olroth's does not reuse at the end of its own effect. It reuses at the end of Dying Sun's effect, which will be 0.2 seconds later. During that 0.2 second window is when we break our ward and get our adrenaline. Pretty neat, huh? As it turns out, the magic number was 109% increased flask effect duration. No more, no less. Not 108%, not 110%. With 109% increased flask effect duration, you could have one flask that lasts exactly as long as adrenaline does, and one flask that lasts just a little bit longer. Now, there's no way to have them only 0.1 second apart unless you flip the whole thing on its head, and instead of increasing flask duration, you just double the number of charges gained. I don't even know if it's mathematically possible to do that. But basically that would be the only way to get the flasks to go off 0.1 second apart. Doing that might be the key, maybe, to a way where I could make this build and not take damage to my life whenever I activated my adrenaline. Might be worth playing with in the future. For the time being, they are 0.2 seconds apart, and halfway through that 0.2 seconds, around the 0.1 second mark, I will take a flurry of hits all in one server tick that breaks my ward and knocks my life down to around 1400. But remember, recoup is recouping all the damage I've taken in the last several seconds, and it's recouping it over 3 seconds, and the damage done to ward counts. So I'm recouping thousands of damage per second. So unless an enemy gets very, very lucky and happens to hit me, basically an enemy would have to hit me in the same server tick to get lucky and kill me, within the same 0.033 seconds. And then 0.1 second later, Olroth comes back online and ward is back, and we're back to having a max hit of over 10,000. Anything less than that doesn't deal any damage at all, or it'll deal some damage if it's upwards of whatever gets through is, well, I'll just show you. 4,580. Anything between 4,580 and like almost 10,000 will not kill me. It will not kill me. It will just drag my life down for a second, and then it pops right back up. And then anything under 4,580 will do nothing. It'll just bounce off the ward. So that is the central gimmick that differentiates me from classic Wardloop. I am, however, using the standard setup of skeletons. This is the ingenious part of Wardloop. This is really what made the whole thing possible. So for Wardloop to work, you need to be able to trigger self-damage that is slightly delayed from whenever the triggered spell happens. So like the spell needs to go off, it needs to wait a beat, and then deal you the damage. Because the cast when damage taken support gem goes on a brief, around quarter-second cooldown. So if you were to, for example, trigger Forbidden Rite deals self-damage, but it cannot continue to trigger itself because the self-damage deals damage to the self immediately. In other words, while cast when damage taken is on cooldown and not counting any damage dealt. So if the damage is instant, it will not go infinite. It just happens the one time. In order to go infinite, you need the damage to be dealt to you on a slight delay. So I'm doing what all good Wardloop builds do. I have a skeleton setup, summons a flurry of skeletons, and I have used reduced skill effect duration on the tree and 2 dust cobalt jewels to reduce their duration to match the cooldown of cast when damage taken precisely. So the cooldown of cast when damage taken and the duration of the skeletons are both 0.198 seconds, meaning that any cast when damage taken spells will go off 5.05 times per second. The skeleton in my setup is being used how a lot of Wardloop builds use it, as kind of a booster rocket. So the skeleton dies. Heartbound Loop is the ring that enables this whole combo and deals us a bit of self-damage, some physical damage, not enough to trigger a high-level skill. If you want to trigger a high-level, like a level 20 cast when damage taken skill, you need to be doing over 3,000 damage to yourself. The skeleton's not going to do that, not unless you have 2 Heartbound Loop rings, you're summoning a bunch of skeletons. Like you could make it happen, but it's not easy. Instead, what we're doing is we're using the death of the skeleton to set off a Forbidden Rite. A low-level Forbidden Rite doesn't take much self-damage to set off, and a low level is perfectly adequate to deal yourself a bunch of additional damage because it's based on a percentage of your life. So if you just scale your life up high enough, then a single skeleton death can trigger Forbidden Rite, and Forbidden Rite can trigger the rest because it'll deal a hefty heaping amount of damage to yourself. It deals 40% of your life and 25% of your energy shield to yourself as chaos damage. You just can't scale your chaos resistance too high or else it's counterproductive. You need to scale your life higher and higher to go with it. So you would do it if you could, but there, you only have so many resources. So that's the engine. Skeletons into Forbidden Rite. And whenever the skeletons die, a new Forbidden Rite goes off, and whenever Forbidden Rite goes off, a new iteration of any other cast when damage taken gems that I want, wherever they're socketed, I can have them up to level 21. I can have a level 21 cast when damage taken gem, and therefore a level 21 spell gem, which is good for damage dealing. Now, the classic Wardloop build used Ice Spear, Creeping Frost, Freezing Pulse. That was, I think, the big three that they were often using. And they were great. And I was actually planning on doing the same myself. And I was preparing bases. So because this was a niche little build that nobody else was making, I could get cheap copies of a synthesized staff. Nobody was doing a staff with the enemies explode synthesized implicit. Nobody. So I could just pick these up whenever they came on the market. And one of them I threw cold fossils at. I think cold fossils is what I did. Pretty sure. Until I got +3 all cold spell skill gems, and I annulled it down to 1 mod, and the whole purpose of this was going to be to recombinate it. The other one I was throwing fossils at with the goal of getting +2 to all spell gems, and I would then annul that down to just 1 mod. You multi-mod it up, so the recombinating trick that you do is you craft multi-mod as a suffix, can have up to 3 crafted modifiers, and then each item would get 2 what are called exclusive crafted prefixes, and as a result that guarantees that you can get any 2 mods on the item. No, let's see, there's a ghost of a chance, right, that you don't get, there's like I think a 10% chance that maybe you don't get what you want, but there's a 90% chance that you get those 2 mods when you smash them together. +2 all spells, +3 all cold spells. That was the goal. From there, I could lock prefixes and reforge crit or reforge something, reforge suffixes until I got something good, or just multi-mod the suffixes. Here's the problem though. Problem, I say loosely. When I was trying to craft for that +2 all spells, I fell into this naturally. Like, I hit the +2 spells, but without recombinating anything on this explodey base, I also happened to hit +3 chaos, and so my entire plan pivoted immediately. I was like, well, I guess we're not doing cold spells anymore. I've got this base around. I'm considering, continuing to buy explodey bases and throw them at this and make the cold variant and see if it feels any better, just for fun. But like when I saw this, I was like, well, I have to do this now, right? A +5 chaos staff in Path of Exile 1 is crazy. It also happened to roll a modest little bit of spell damage. I don't know. This build is no longer scaling crit the way I thought it was gonna. I can either lean harder into crit, or I might re-multi-mod this. I don't know. But this is still a ridiculously good staff. It's ridiculously good. All pieces of it are amazing. So, that's the weapon. What am I using it to power? Well, Essence Drain of Wickedness and Soul Rend of the Spiral. They have the advantage of being projectile chaos spells, of which there are only 3. The Transfigured, like Essence Drain versus Essence Drain of Wickedness, those don't count as different spells, meaning that they would be on the same cooldown for cast when damage taken, so there's no point in replicating them. You can only cast one at a time. So you need different chaos projectile spells. Well, these are the 2, because the third one is Forbidden Rite, and that's being used as my kind of enabler spell. I wonder if there is a version of this where I maybe use Forbidden Rite in the main setup over here. Maybe. I played with the damage and I couldn't get it to come out as good as Soul Rend of the Spiral, because so many Soul Rend of the Spiral projectiles can hit the same enemy because they're fired in sequence. It's really strong. Now, right now, this is a level 20 gem. And I'm just being lazy and not spending another 10 divines on a level 21 cast when damage taken, so that I can up it to my level 21 Soul Rend of the Spiral here, which I would like to do. But I've been corrupting my own cast when damage takens, hoping to hit a level 21 myself. I don't know. I'm just being stingy. I've got the currency to spare. I could go and spend 10 on my last level 21 cast when damage taken and upgrade this gem, but I've already got Essence Drain of Wickedness at level 21. it's getting +1 from, oh, I need to go get myself another Awakened Void manipulation. I'm missing damage on that. I meant to buy 2, and I only bought 1. Silly me. So I would be getting another +1 from Awakened Void manipulation. I'm getting +1 from Awakened Added Chaos, and I'm getting 5 from my weapon. And then I'm getting 2 from my amulet. This amulet is another thing that, like the staff, is just a find that I could pull off because nobody else is buying for this build. This is crazy. So the energy shield is amazing because 33% increase maximum energy shield. I'm using the Faith Guard helmet, which says increases and reductions to energy shield apply to ward instead. That's why without Olroth's Resolve up, my ward is 29,000. And with Olroth's up, my ward is still 4,500. That's in large part due to Faith Guard. We just get so much from Faith Guard. We get to double dip on global defenses because of this. Global defenses increases both ward and energy shield, which then in turn increases ward. It's bonkers, frankly. We're using Yinda's stand along with, so it's normally by default 50% of armor and evasion from body armor gets turned into ward. You quality it up with defense modifiers, it becomes 60. You add that to the 50% from Kelgarian armor, and you're getting 110% in total of your evasion and armor from your body armor. Yet another item that if any sizable number of people were trying to make this build, this would be insane to make. I was ready to settle for just getting an 8% increase explicit defense mod enchantment, and somebody sold me this one that also had 27 quality on it for, like, it was expensive, but I think it was under 10 div. Like, this is the 30 plus div base, frankly, at least. Like, if you tried to, he basically, what this guy did, I asked him, I was like, how did you get this base? I had a suspicion of how he got it, and I was right. He got a 27 quality base, and he threw 1 tailoring orb at it and lucked out like crazy, and his 1 tailoring orb hit the explicit defense mod. That is a ridiculously low chance. There's so many mods that you can hit with a tailoring orb, and this is the most desirable one, and that's crazy. So as a result, I was able to build an armor that has 3,600 each armor and evasion rating, which is bonkers. In fact, I could go higher on this. I rolled this for a while and ended up settling for tier 3% increased armor and evasion. If you had all tier 1s on this base, this would be even more ridiculous. The other expensive piece of this, though, is getting that flask gain 2 charges every 3 seconds. That's an exceptional tier modifier. So I actually did their Searing XR, so I did the Grand Embers until I got +1 flask charges, and then you have to upgrade it with an Orb of Conflict. And then if you upgrade it successfully, there's no visible change. It stays 1. And then you have to upgrade it successfully a second time, and then it upgrades to 2 charges every 3 seconds. That was required. There was no way to make this build without that. Just couldn't get enough flask charges otherwise. So that was expensive to do. I probably spent 5 or 6 Orbs of Conflict on it. It was rough. Let's see, other features of the build. The gloves are fairly standard. I may have even bought these as is and then done the Eldritch crafting myself. I'm pretty sure I just bought these as is. My only criteria were I wanted high life, so I needed the high life to make sure that I could activate everything with a single forbidden rite. I needed 40% of my forbidden rite, 40% of my life to be high enough. Also, I had crafted this ring that had a bunch of chaos res on it. I didn't want to give it up because the build was too squishy with low chaos res. So I've got -15 chaos resistance with this build. It is high enough that I'm not getting one tapped by chaos damage. Chaos damage is still the thing that I am by far the weakest to. I don't like to run maps that have withered on them, but this is such a good build. It's got % increased energy shield and a huge amount of maximum life. When I crafted this, I was like, whatever, I will make the build work around this chaos res, which you normally wouldn't want too much of. So I need life everywhere is the upshot of that. So I need really high life rolls to make sure that my Forbidden Rite can overcome that chaos resistance. So I think I bought these pretty much as is, crafted the decks, and crafted the Eldritch Implicits. The boots were another story. The boots. There's a whole video on these boots if you're interested. It's a little boring, but the boots, I needed 3 very specific things. I wanted tier 1% ward, I wanted tier 1 life, and I wanted tier 0 cooldown recovery. In other words, the elevated Crusader modifier, which the elevated modifier is considered an exclusive mod for recombinating purposes, meaning, in short, there is no efficient way to recombinate with items that already have the elevated modifier. What you do is you recombinate items that have the tier 1 modifier and another random Crusader mod. Once the recombination is successful, you hit it with an Orb of Dominance, and it's a 50-50. Either you get set back several steps, or your item is done. And it took me a lot of currency, but I really needed these boots. Why was I so insistent on T0 cooldown recovery? Because I needed to get my cast when damage taken to the 5.05 times per second cooldown, the 0.198 second cooldown. That was the only way that I could ensure that that I could get 1 hit guaranteed while the flask was down. That if the flask was down for 0.2 seconds, no matter what, I would definitely during that 0.2 seconds get a hit with my cast when damage taken loop. So I absolutely needed my cooldown to achieve that breakpoint. The only way to achieve that breakpoint is with 27 cooldown. Now, this is a very jewel socket starved build. We're using jewel sockets for a lot of things, including this one, which I'm just getting pure life from this one. Just a ton of life from this Light of Meaning jewel. Well, Abyssal Jewels can roll up to 3% cooldown recovery rate. Here's the problem. 3% cooldown recovery rate is a level 86 modifier. Those are not dropping very often. They're not being put on the market very often. Not easy to find something that has 3% cooldown recovery rate and like any other mods that you want, like Life and Dex, which this build needs. But I got some. I got 3 of those jewels, and there just wasn't space for a 4th. I couldn't do it. And it's one of the only places to get cooldown recovery. Another prominent place Wardloop builds get cooldown recovery is on the belt. You get a Crusader Influence belt, but I couldn't. I needed Yinda's stand. It was non-negotiable. It was something that I couldn't replace, so the belt was not available. The only thing available was my boots. And I could only get up to, with 3 jewels, the most I could get is 9 cooldown recovery. There is no way with a tier 1 Crusader cooldown boots to combine that with 3 jewels and achieve the cooldown breakpoint of 0.198. You can math it out however you want. It cannot be done. If you have 3 jewels and 1 pair of boots, no belt, you cannot achieve that breakpoint without elevated boots. Has to happen. So I went through the whole painful crafting process, and I'm very proud of the boots that I got as a result. Tier 1 life, tier 1 ward, cooldown recovery, and I multi-modded to finish it up. So, is there any other gear that we need to talk about? Clusters. Good to talk about clusters. Solving the precise 109 flask increased duration problem, that was harder than you'd think. Even once you know that the number needs to be 109, actually getting it there is another story. So you use combinations of jewels that have 6% increased flask duration with, like this one, just some more flask charges gained, which you need to achieve at least, I think it was 87% I needed to get of that. At least flask charges gained, I could go over on. That one I didn't have to be so precise. I couldn't go under, but I could go over. So you use jewels. This one just has 6 per node increased flask effect duration. This one has 6, but with 25 increased effect, 25%, so it's actually 8 per node. And this one is 6, but with 35% increased effect, so it's actually 9 per node. And so, with individual combinations, you can take skill points that are worth 6, 8, or 9 increased flask effect duration. Between those, and if you need to, you can sub in a Brood for Potency node with 10 increased flask effect duration. I didn't end up needing one of those in the end. Somehow you get to 109. So that was more challenging than I would have thought, but we got there. And then, like I said, you just need to get to 87, I think it was, percent charges gained, which I have 2 fasting nodes here for 20 each. And then I've got... I did have charges gained on my Brutal Restraint. That's right. I dropped them and got fasting nodes. I got more fasting nodes because I needed my Brutal Restraint to do other things. I needed that to get my Frenzy charges. And I use Frenzy charges to keep up my Phase Run, which makes me even faster and lets me walk through things. Great skill to have on cast and damage taken. Other cluster jewels. So Overwhelming Malice, actually a key feature of this build. This is where all of my withered stacks are coming from. I'm hitting so many times per second that even though I have a relatively low crit chance with this iteration of the build, I'm hitting so many times per second that I will have Unholy Might against single targets, no problem. And Unholy Might means that each hit will inflict Withered. Well, Withered only lasts 2 seconds and it stacks up to 15. Trust me, I'm hitting a single target way more than 15 times in 2 seconds, so they will have full withered stacks. And it's all coming from that one node. I would take Touch of Cruelty if I had the points for it. I might end up taking it. What I'd really like to do is, I had this staff wheel taken for crit. It was helping with my crit chance. And I took the 30% increased defenses, which impacts energy shield and therefore ward, and it also impacts ward, so that's big. Just was super point starved. Had to spend more points than I anticipated solving the mana problem. If you could get more intelligence, you might have an easier time with mana. But basically, if you ever see the build kind of needing to do a couple of weapon swaps to get its cast when damage taken loop started, like you're pulling multiple times on a lawnmower to try and get the engine to turn over, it's because mana recoup hasn't kicked in yet. So the way this works is, once you've taken enough self-damage from your cast when damage taken loops, you'll be recouping enough mana to self-sustain the loop. It's fine. But that first time, you might not recoup quite enough mana to cast all your skills here. Even with Battle Rouse, recoup 10 mana, Mastery, recoup 10 mana, reduce mana cost of skills, reduce mana cost of skills, reduce mana cost of skills. This would be one advantage to trying out the cold version, because you can slot inspiration into your main skill setups that way and drastically reduce the cost of your main skills while dealing more damage, better crit. Like, inspiration's a gimme, it's a no-brainer. But with chaos spells, there's no point in putting inspiration in. So I've spent a lot of points on mana. I would love to respec them, take the staff nodes here, crit, defenses, work my way back up here to Heart of Darkness, and or Corruption for increased effective withered. But to be clear, I'm level 92, so I don't have infinity points left to work with here. Talked Abyssal Jewels, they're just cooldown life and some other stuff that I need. This Megalomaniac I'm proud of. Spring back for Energy Shield, aka Ward. Fettle for life, need as much life as possible. And Blessed Rebirth, very important, underrated key portion of Wardloop builds. You want your skeletons dying on your terms at exactly 0.198 seconds, not a moment sooner. And if you are in a high damage environment and you have not scaled minion life, your skeletons might be dying a little early and breaking your ward loop. This way, with Blessed Rebirth, they cannot die until they run out of duration, which they will do. A lot of Dust Jewels. Yeah, Let's see, anything else that we need to talk about? I had plopped in this Unnatural Instinct right here. It allocates or gives you the bonuses of all non-allocated smalls, and so that racked up a huge amount of extra life from this here. But number one, it cost 3 points to get there, and number two, you had to take an extra 2 points because it was granting these skill effect duration increases. I don't want to increase my skill effect duration. I want my skeletons to be low, so I actually had to allocate these points with Unnatural Instinct right here just so that they wouldn't work. And that felt wasteful, so I took Unnatural Instinct out. This is the ring that I was using that has no chaos res, just a lot more life and strength. And this, I just found I was way too squishy to chaos damage with this ring. It was otherwise very good, and I didn't mind the fact that it was easier to trigger Forbidden Rite with lower chaos resistance, but yeah, just I needed the chaos res. And let's just close out with a word about the Ascendancy here. So we do take the Yinda's Stand replica here, Kelgarian armor, 100% global defenses. It's a gimme, easy one, no brainer. The 100% faster restoration of ward doesn't matter for us. I'm restoring ward with Olroth's Resolve 0.2 seconds after it goes down. So I guess this is pertinent if my loop were to ever break, like if I ran into a flask siphoner mob or something like that. This, I guess, would help a little bit there. But, that's not the reason I take it. I take it for the global defenses. After that, there are no other notables that I want. I don't want to have no intelligence. That would be bad. I need intelligence for a lot that I do with this build. I don't want reduced dexterity, and I don't care about my hits not being evaded, so this does nothing for me. So instead of taking one of the notables, I just took a second small ascendancy point, because it's at least giving me a little strength and 10% global defense. That's worth it. So this is the rare build that only takes 3 notables and then just takes an extra small in place of a 4th notable. Little word on the path of building. I wouldn't take the full DPS number here too seriously. It says it's 3.3 million DPS. I think it might be noticeably higher than that. It all comes down to how many projectiles overlap and hit the same enemy. So I've got it tentatively at 4 Soul Rend projectiles hitting a particular enemy and 2 Essence Drain of Wickedness. Now this one is probably accurate because multiple projectiles for Essence Drain of Wickedness, multiple simultaneous projectiles cannot hit the same enemy more than once. So you're pretty much only going to get it out and on the way back with returning projectile support. So that one is reasonable, I think. But Soul Rend of the Spiral, I mean, take a look here. It's doing 3 projectiles with Dying Sun, which is constantly up, and they could all hit and all come back. They could all hit and some come back. Put it this way, you're not going to get more than 6 here, but you're probably not going to get less than 3 either. And I don't know if there's some other piece of the calculation that I'm missing. Maybe it's just the explosions that are coming from the staff that feel so potent, but it just feels better than 3 million damage. I had a theoretical version that went over 10, so there's still some work that could be done on the build to push the damage higher, and that's something I'm interested in doing. But yeah, just wanted to go through the POB really quick. Other than the damage calculation, I don't think it really shows anything that you couldn't have seen in game. I've got Adrenaline ticked because I'm always going to have that active thanks to my little trickery. Unholy Might with high wither stacks. Again, my little trickery. So I think the only other thing to talk about with the path of building is the effective hit pool, and I'll just pull up a zoomed in version of it here. It'll be hopefully easier for you to see. And what's interesting about the effective hit pool in this build is that you can take it pretty literally. So when normally when you're interpreting the effective hit pool and the max hit of a build, you have to kind of keep some thoughts in the back of your mind. Number one, max hit is just the maximum hit you can take. It doesn't account for all the many little hits that are coming in rapidly, and it doesn't account for your recovery to those hits. So your effective hit pool may be substantially higher if, for example, you can only take a maximum hit of 20,000, but you've got an Aegis Aurora and you're blocking a bunch and recovering a bunch of energy shield. This is the rare build where when it says this is your max hit, like that's it. You either take that hit or you don't. If I take a hit of chaos damage for 7,600 damage, I survive and I recoup whatever life I lost in under a second. If I take a hit of 7,800 chaos damage, then I die instantly with no chance to do anything about it. I can't move out of the way. Once I take that hit, it's just over. So it's a little rare in that regard. Obviously, chaos is my biggest weakness, followed by physical, but it's rare to see physical hits that large. You're basically looking at a Shaper Slam or something that you have juiced to the gills in a mapping scenario, and you've taken all the terrible altars and you've all the terrible map modifiers and everything else. So the build is reasonably tanky until it's not. It can fall over dead, and it has done so. T17 bosses are ones that they hit pretty hard. So yeah, other than that though, I think as you've seen in the videos, in just standard mapping scenarios, as long as you're not taking map mods and altar mods that are too crazy, you're just not going to die. You're just going to get hit over and over and stand in the middle and nothing happens. So yeah. I think that is about it on the POB. The build overall, how is it? It's cute. I'm glad I did it. It was a challenge. I feel very accomplished for having put it together. It made me feel good to see all the pieces kind of click together and actually do something. It's not quite as tanky as I'd hoped, and not just because something might sneak through during that 0.1 second window where my life goes down. That's not all the times that I die. Like, it's just not quite there on a juiced up tier 17 map, and that's a shame. I would have loved to be able to take this safely into a tier 17 map and just stand still in the middle of a mob, and I couldn't do it. So I'm a little disappointed in that, but that's a minor complaint for a gimmicky meme build like this. On the whole, I'm happy with it. Do I recommend you run it? Not really. I mean, I'm happy to walk you through and answer your questions, do anything like that, but I'm not making this build the way I would make like a guide, the way I do for like my Arc Elementalist or whatever. I'm not saying, and you should run out and do it too. Like, it's fun if you're looking for something to do. It's a hoot trying to solve the problems, but this is not like hey, you need to put this together so you can experience this amazing thing. Like, it's just cute. It's fun to do, but I don't know if it's worth the very, very large investment that I put into this. Like, this was definitely hundreds of divines. I don't know what a mirror is currently going for, but could I have spent a mirror on this? Maybe. I spent a lot, especially spent on gear that didn't end up being used in the final version of the build. So I guess I could resell some of that stuff. But yeah, it was very expensive, but it's gratifying, and I'm glad I did it. So yeah, let me know if you've got any questions down in the comments. I'll link to some general resources about Wardloop as an overall concept if you're interested in that. And in the meantime, thank you for tuning in, and take it easy.